Hi, it's Professor Marino again. How'd that happen? How did it happen? How's it always me? Oh, it's my YouTube page. That's right. I'm here to talk to you about the Polanski Macbeth. Now, a word of warning before we get started. This was, you'll see, a co-production of Playboy Pictures, so there's nudity in here where there really doesn't need to be any. Don't watch this movie with children, but also don't save it for date night. You'll find the nudity is actually not that sexual and not that interesting, or I don't know what you enjoy. I'm not using this movie for date night. More importantly, this movie is very violent. One of the most violent movies we'll see. You will see blood everywhere. Do not watch it with children. We're going to see people lose important body parts, extremely necessary body parts. We are going to see a brief sequence of what is a simulated rape that is tucked away in the scene with Lady Macbeth and her child when the murderers come. So be warned about that. And in general, you'll see blood and gore everywhere. This film, Polanski is very committed to seeing, to showing as much violence as possible to make this kind of unattractive. It's not meant to be pretty. The movie's meant to be pretty. The violence is meant to be ugly. Now, if you've read Hindle or if you've just gone to the Wikipedia, you'll know that Polanski made this movie. It's the first movie he made after the brutal murder of his own wife in Los Angeles in 1969 by members of the so-called Charles Manson family. And that's true. That's a real thing. Don't turn that to the key of all mythologies. Don't turn this into the Manson family Macbeth. It's not. Roman Polanski, and this is before some of his other legal troubles, where he's also, I'm not going to excuse, and Charles Manson are not the same guy, and the artistic choices Polanski are making here are not simply legible. What happens if you lose your spouse to violence? One of the things Polanski is doing, this is the most naturalist movie we'll see, I think, of all the movies we see. The most committed to recreating what things really look like, which is interesting because what Macbeth is a play where recovering what things really look like is impossible. You'll notice we're on location. How do you know we're on location? We're outdoors with mountains everywhere. We've gone to the north of Wales expensively to film this whole movie, so it'll look plausibly like Scotland. We've also costumed it in a medieval way. The actual historical Macbeth, and Shakespeare plays very fast and loose with history. He's distorted Macbeth's story. In fact, he spliced the Macbeth story together with parts of another Scottish king's story. So it's a kind of a little bit make-believe, a little bit propaganda. But the real Macbeth, etc., lived 1,000 years ago, 970 years ago, in the 11th century, before anything like what we know as the English language was spoken. And Polanski's trying to set place like a kind of more or less 11th century, maybe a little later with fudging, 11th century medieval place. It's not really looking like what Scotland might have looked like in the 11th century, but what Western Europe, England, France might have looked like in terms of what the warriors are wearing. Shakespeare doesn't do this. The idea of historical costuming is a very modern idea. Shakespeare's actors played Macbeth wearing standard modern dress. By modern dress, I mean like 1606 clothes, because they premiered this probably 1606, 1607. This idea of recreating the thing in the world of the story more accurately is not a Shakespeare thing, but a modern thing that Polanski is doing. In the same way, Polanski is very interested in, everyone who directs this play is very interested in the witches. He's interested in the witches, but he can't bring it, even though the movie he made before this had like witches and the devil's baby and whatnot in New York City. The movie before this was Rosemary's Baby. The Polanski movie before this was Rosemary's Baby. Polanski isn't willing to really accept the supernatural. He needs to create some belief of what kind of witches might be, what might they be doing. And there's often, in the 20th century and 21st century, a desire to read what's going on with what Macbeth sees is happening inside Macbeth's head, which isn't really a kind of 16th or 17th century way of looking at things. There's still the idea that the witches might be real, and then in any case, if you have psychological problems, they're probably not coming from inside your head. They might be coming from outside your head. Like, when Shakespeare's audience hears Macbeth talking about a dagger that he can see and they can't, they don't necessarily presume, as we do after Freud, that it's coming from inside his psychology. They might consider the hypothesis, they might take number one probability as some external force is making Macbeth see stuff, and that's bad. Polanski is also going to show us a lot of things that aggressively that Shakespeare only tells. Macbeth withholds a lot. One of the funny things about how much blood there is in this movie is Macbeth is a play about the blood we can't see. I mean that both on in terms of the murders we don't see happen. Macbeth does not die on stage. Lady Macduff does not die on stage. And who else doesn't die on stage? Duncan does not die on stage. Duncan's guards don't die on stage. We don't see that. Most of the violence is withheld from us. The battle at the beginning is withheld from us. There's a play that begins with us talking about a battle we're never going to see. And you'll see that Throne of Blood actually starts the movie that way. It's not a kind of natural fit for current film storytelling where we want to see stuff. It's also very literally the most important blood here is the blood we never see, the blood that we're hallucinating or that happens only in the character's language. We don't see that blood that's happening on so the most important blood in this play is on Lady Macbeth's hands, and we don't see it because only she can see it. This play is not about getting inside the character's head, but trying to give us a realistic view of the world so we can look at the characters. Now that said, when Macbeth sees things that other characters don't or that the audience doesn't, there are also filmmaking choices. This film decides to show us the dagger he can't see. If there's that effect, don't laugh. It's 1971. No one's seen Star Wars yet. No one's made Star Wars yet. Effects aren't that good. But we do a special effect to see the dagger of the mind. We equivocate. Sometimes we see Banquo's ghost, sometimes we don't. How did it go down in Shakespeare's theater? You just saw Banquo's ghost. He came on stage and that was that. That was the effect. Just like the ghost effect in Hamlet is. Actor playing ghost comes on stage. That's that. Is he just in Macbeth's head? That's an anachronistic idea. That's more our idea of things than the original idea of things. Something else Polanski is doing is trying to lift things that are happening in the poetry, images that keep coming back in the actor's words. He's trying to give us as visual images. Okay, Shakespeare is writing in poetry, and one of the ways his theater works, when there wasn't much scenery, the costuming was relatively simple by students, effects, ha ha ha. I guess they did have a severed head to bring in to be the ex-Macbeth. A severed head prop. Everybody loves a good severed head prop, apparently. A lot of what happens there is in the language, in the poetry, in the description, the metaphors and the figures of speech the characters use. And every play of Shakespeare's has a few images that keep coming back. One, for example, the foul and fair image, the mixture of opposites and the inability to tell the difference between them, comes through in Shakespeare, in Macbeth, all the time. Foul is fair. So fair and foul a day I have not seen. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through fog and filthy air. Different characters who aren't talking to each other will say the same words. This is called a motif. It's a piece of language that keeps coming back and being played in different ways and that works in the audience in pretty subtle, sometimes subliminal ways. Film isn't primarily a sound medium, it's more about the pictures than the sounds. So Polanski, like a lot of other filmmakers, is trying to find ways to pluck out some of those recurring motifs that are in Shakespeare's language and put them on the screen visually. One of the ones he's picked is there's a lot of bear baiting references in Macbeth, a lot of metaphors about bear baiting it, and they get faster and more furious as Macbeth nears his end, and he talks about not wanting to be tied to a stake. Who would be tied to a stake? A bear and bear baiting. What is bear baiting? Okay, if Polanski's Macbeth isn't disgusting for you, let me tell you some disgusting things. Bear baiting is a sport that the Elizabethans enjoy. That's happening just around the corner from the Globe Theatre in another building that looks a lot like the Globe Theatre. It's the same shape, it's the same kind of theater. What they do is they take a bear and they chain it to a stake in the ground, and they set vicious dogs on it. So the dogs and the bears fight to the death, and there's gambling involved. What is this? This is like, if you thought bullfighting was kind of too wishy-washy liberal, bear baiting. Polanski is going to get us bear images in this film. He's going to show us bear baiting as much as he can. In fact, he tried to stage a full-on bear bait, and apparently you can't get bears and dogs. He'll do that anymore. You can't get them to fight to the death. They'll run away. You can't stage a bear bait. Turns out that's a cultural thing too, and you got to train these animals in very particular ways. But he's committed to it. He's taken something from the text and literalized or visualized it on the screen, which is a thing lots of other directors do. It's easy to notice here. And it goes with the image he picked was one of enormous brutality. This is about nasty ugly. This is also a version, it's what I'll call the kind of the version of the Middle Ages, the anti-idealist version of the Middle Ages. Let's make it as dirty and messy as possible. There's a version where there's an unrealistically, you'll see in the movies, an unrealistically cleaned up Middle Ages. And then you move to an unrealistically even dirtier than it was Middle Ages. Polanski's living through that moment where there's just muck everywhere. Much more than there would be for the people at the very top of the political food chain. Something else he's done that Handel will remind you of is that he's taken Ross, a minor character, and bundled him with other speeches and turned him into a character who doesn't quite exist in the play. Ross is this political opportunist in Polanski's movie who has various messengers and stand-ins have been lumped together, added to Ross's speeches to turn Ross into a political opportunist character who plays both sides of the aisle, who becomes like an evil henchman to Macbeth but outlives him. This is done without violating the text, but simply by lumping things together. Orson Welles, whose Macbeth movie we were not watching this semester, does a similar thing, but he actually creates a priest character at all cloth, lumps some messengers together. Whedon did this in Much Ado About Nothing. He turned a bunch of messenger speeches into like Leonato's assistant, and there's no Leonato's assistant in the play. Polanski's done that with the character of Ross, and for a very particular reason, and a moment of real political cynicism in the 1970s. This is also Polanski later going to make that masterpiece of cynicism, Chinatown. He has created a politically cynical character that tries to suggest to the audience that there are no real good guys to when you're like that meet the new boss. When you meet Malcolm, we're meeting the new boss, same as the old boss, and we've also seen enormous ugly violence. In terms of camera work, notice when Polanski goes to the handheld, when he moves the camera around, there are some very long shots in this. I mean, long takes where the camera moves, it goes upstairs, and or even jolts around a little bit to give us actually sometimes a sense of being in the crowd around Macbeth, a kind of you are there thing. I'm thinking particularly as we go down the corridor towards Duncan's bedchamber after he's killed, the camera kind of stops and kind of does a little jostle because it's been tracking the actors who are walking in front of it, and they stop short, and the camera stops short. This creates an impression. The camera can be an actor, just as it is in Olivier's Hamlet, and it will be in Olivier's Henry V. Okay, that's all for now. Next, Throne of Blood. Enjoy.